Hey guys, it's Spyros from the Self-Help Photographer. Now today we're talking about buying lenses. Now there's lots to know about lenses, and we're going to break it down by deciphering all of the letters and numbers and stuff. We're going to use the Canon EF 70 to 300 millimeter f4 to 5.6 IS USM autofocus telephoto zoom lens as our example lens. Let's get to it. The first part is the easiest part. This is the manufacturer. The camera makers such as Canon, Nikon, Pentax, and Sony all make lenses. And there are third-party companies that make lenses too, such as Tamron and Sigma. EF indicates the lens type. So you can't just attach any lens to any camera. If the lens is not compatible with the camera, it's going to be useless. Canon has two main lens types, EF and EFS. EF lenses can be used on any Canon DSLR. EFS lenses, however, are designed specifically to be used on cameras that have the smaller APS-C sized sensors. Generally speaking, the digital Rebel line has APS-C sized sensors. The 60D and the 7D cameras also do, and their predecessors like the 40D, the 50D, etc. EFS lenses are not compatible with the full-frame sensor cameras. The Canon lens system is actually pretty simple because all you really need to know is the sensor size in your camera. And knowing that, you can pick a lens that will be compatible with your camera. Nikon's lenses are a little more confusing. Nikon has AF-D lenses, also known as AF, the AFS lenses, which are known as the DX, and then the G lenses. It's confusing. Now the AF-D lenses are compatible with all Nikon DSLR cameras, but they will not autofocus on the D3000 series or D5000 series cameras. This is the D3100, the D3200, the D5000, the D5100, will not autofocus with these cameras. In order to make these entry-level DSLRs cheaper, Nikon left out the autofocus motor from the camera body. Now the AFS lenses, which are the DX series, these all have autofocus motors in the lens. These lenses are compatible with all Nikon DSLRs, and they will autofocus on all Nikon DSLR cameras, including the 3000 and 5000 series. Now the G lenses are a subset of the AFS lenses, which are the DX series. The G lenses also have the autofocus motor in them and also are compatible with all Nikon DSLRs. The main difference is that these lenses do not have a manual aperture ring on them. Nikon traditionally has a manual aperture ring that allows you to set the aperture, but you can do that also in the camera. Now, some photographers love having this ring, but if it's not important to you to have, then you can save some money on an AFS series lens by getting a G series that does not have this aperture ring on it. The 70 to 300 millimeter is the focal length of the lens. This is measured in millimeters, and it is based on the 35 millimeter film standard. Now, lenses with variable focal lengths are called zoom lenses, and lenses that have a fixed focal length are called prime lenses. The 70 to 300 millimeter is an example of a zoom lens. A 50 millimeter is an example of a prime lens. It has just one focal length. The focal length refers to the field of view for the lens, how much the lens can see. And there are three main focal length types. You have wide-angle view, standard view, and the telephoto view. The wide-angle lenses have a wide field of view for photographing large scenes, such as landscapes, large crowds, things of that nature. When you want a wide view, you want a wide-angle lens. Standard lenses have a sort of middle field of view, almost as if you were looking right through your eyes and not even using the camera. These are sort of good walking around lenses. And then the telephoto lenses have a narrow field of view, and that allows you to see something very far away from you and take a photograph of it. Next is f4 to 5.6. This is the maximum aperture of the lens. Now, if you haven't watched my video on Aperture, make sure you subscribe in the side and get access to the entire video series. I also have a link down below for you. To cover it briefly, the aperture is the opening in the lens that lets light into the camera. Generally speaking, the bigger the aperture, the better the lens, and the smaller the number, the bigger the aperture is. So you're looking for a lens that has a small number here for this. Zoom lenses often have a variable maximum aperture, and this is what you're seeing with this Canon 70-300. The f4 to 5.6 is the range of maximum aperture. These variable maximum aperture lenses are generally not very good lenses. They're cheaper to make and they don't perform very good at the telephoto end of the zoom, which kind of defeats the purpose of the lens in general. The problem is that the bigger aperture part of the range is always at the wider end of the zoom. But the bigger aperture is almost always more helpful and more needed at the telephoto end of the focal range zoom, which again makes the lens a poor performer when it is zoomed way up. Now, some zoom lenses have a fixed maximum aperture. This is really cool. This means that the maximum available aperture stays the same throughout the entire zoom range. An example of this is the Nikon AF 80-200mm f2.8 telephoto zoom lens. The key here is the f2.8. This is a telephoto zoom, but whether the lens is zoomed to 80mm or 200mm, the maximum aperture is always f2.8. These lenses are more costly, but they are almost always better lenses than these cheaper variable aperture lenses. Prime lenses, on the other hand, always have a constant maximum aperture. Since the lens doesn't zoom, it doesn't have a change in focal length, the maximum aperture stays the same, it's constant. And prime lenses are a great alternative to zoom lenses. You can get better quality lenses with larger maximum apertures, all while spending less money. IS is the next designation in this lens title, and IS stands for image stabilization. This is a technology that was developed for lenses that have smaller maximum apertures, these cheaper lenses that we were just talking about. Image stabilization tries to combat the poor performance of these lower quality lenses by putting kind of like an anti-shock system in the lens to compensate for the lack of larger apertures. The idea is that the anti-shock system stabilizes the internal elements of the lens, which helps to reduce blur in your photos when your aperture can't open wide enough to give you a good enough shutter speed. Now, on Canon it's called IS, which stands for image stabilization. Nikon calls it VR for vibration reduction. Sigma calls it OS for optical stabilizer, and finally Tamron calls it VC for vibration compensation. Now, I've never used a lens with any kind of image stabilization. I'm just not really sold on the idea, so I don't really buy them. I would rather spend the extra money to buy a lens that has a wide maximum aperture than spend extra money on a lens that has some funky anti-shock system that's supposed to compensate for having a small maximum aperture. The last part of the lens is the easiest, this autofocus telephoto zoom designation. We've already explained all of this stuff by deciphering everything else that we've looked at before, so this is sort of the easy explanation for the lens. Okay, let's recap this. Number one, you need to make sure the lens is compatible with your camera. Number two, look at the aperture. The smaller the f number, the bigger the maximum aperture, and bigger is better. Number four, fixed aperture zooms are more expensive, but they're way better lenses. Number five, make sure you actually need a telephoto lens before you buy one. You can get closer with your feet. And finally, number six, image stabilization. This is kind of a half measure, and I personally think that a bigger aperture is a better option. Okay guys, that's all I got for you this week. Now, if you want a checklist with all of this information recapped, look down below for a link and you can download that and stuff it into your bag when you head out to look at some lenses. If you have any questions, hit me up on Facebook and get out there and take some damn photos.